As an ex-Jehovah's Witness, what was it like going from door to door, knocking on people's doors on a Saturday morning and telling them about Jehovah? Quick background, I was recruited as a Jehovah's Witness at age 14 and I spent 22 years as one, and I finally left in 2018. So yes, in those 22 years, practically every week I had to go out, knock on people's doors and try and preach to them. So what is it like? I can tell you now, most witnesses, and I'm not saying everyone, but most witnesses hate doing it. They might say, oh yeah, we're doing God's work, and I love talking to people about Jehovah. They're lying. It is not natural and it is not pleasant to knock on people's doors and to try proselytize to them against their will. And the worst part of it was that usually ended up knocking on the same door every 6 to 8 weeks, and it was kind of disrespectful going back somewhere where they're not interested. But let's say someone opens a door and they actually talk to you. So what is it like on the side of Jehovah's Witnesses? So personally, I hated every moment of it, but usually I'd go with someone who would take over and try and read something from the Bible, or usually showing their magazines like the Watchtower and Awake, to try and get the householder to take them to talk about it, because the idea was to get a return visit and maybe a Bible study, and then eventually rope someone in. I didn't like doing it, and most people would count the time when it would get to about an hour, so you had something to put on the report. So back in those days, I had to do reports for every hour spent on the so-called ministry or preaching work. And sometimes there were some nice conversations, not very often. However, most times people were just being very polite and trying to give a hint that they weren't interested. Most times I also felt very embarrassed to knock on people's doors. I hated it because it felt very vulnerable to me. I felt exposed, because when you're going on the street and you're knocking on a door one after another, of course people can see you. I would always be conscious of the fact that it was intrusive, especially when we're sent out on a Saturday morning when most people want to have a lie in or they're doing their own thing. So last thing they want to do is have some religious salesperson come into the door and talking about the Bible. Occasionally we'd get someone who would be quite scary. I don't blame them, because they'd probably been fed up of trying to tell Jehovah's Witnesses they're not interested and having their wishes disrespected. So yes, there were some nasty encounters, and whilst I wouldn't personally be nasty to people who knock on my door, I do know that a lot of times, whether you're a religious salesman or a normal salesman, there is an element of disrespect that when people say I'm not interested, they still continue peddling their message, despite the person clearly showing that they don't want to purchase anything, they don't want to take anything, they don't want to sign up to anything. So yes, it can be intimidating to go knock on doors, especially because you feel you have to, and you think that this is you earning your place in paradise. But I can say now that 99% of the witnesses I met in my 22 years did not like doing it, because it is not natural. It goes against human nature to try and force a message on people who don't want to hear it. So yes, if you get a Jehovah's Witness knock on your door trying to talk about the Bible, if you are genuinely not wanting them to come back again, you need to ask to be classed as a do not call, because that is the only time they will leave you alone. If you are very clear and say, I wish to be a do not call, then hopefully you'll be left alone for about a couple of years. Unfortunately, unless you're an apostate like me, you probably are going to get them sooner or later. But you could always say you're a witch or a Satanist, so they'd be too scared to come and talk to you. So I hope you found that interesting, and I will speak to you soon. Bye.